A very warm welcome to everybody who's joined us this afternoon. It's great to have this programme on homes built together, community-led housing and co-housing. For those of you who joined us thinking you'll be hearing a presentation based on some work that's been done in Europe, looking at different models of collaborative housing, we had to pull that at fairly short notice, and Melissa and the team will be joining us at our happy hour on the 16th of December instead. But rather than waste a session, we thought, why not get some more leading lights together to present on work that's happening across England on community-led housing and co-housing. So we're delighted that they've stepped up to join us at very short notice. So Mellis, thanks ever so. It was great to meet you at the Housing Design Awards and hear a lot about the award-winning Angel Yard. Sam, it's lovely to have you back. Another fantastic occasion of that award ceremony with the Housing Design Awards for your work in Bridport and Hazelmead in particular. Dawn, lovely to see you again on screen and your work. In fact, I think the last time you joined us, you worked for the West Midlands Legacy Agency. So it's great to see you now with a Housing 21 hat and talk about the project that you're leading on in Lozells, Birmingham. And then, as Sally said, we'll have a chance for questions and a panel debate before we bring this happy hour to a close. Just before I hand over to Mellis, can I also thank UKRI for sponsoring our happy hour series. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Mellis, and I think this is your first time joining us at a happy hour as a presenter. We look forward to many more to come.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. What a lovely introduction. I check you can see my screen okay. Well, it's a real thrill to be here presenting to this happy hour, and I thought I would focus on co-designing co-housing at Angel Yard, which is a co-housing scheme in Norwich. But just a brief introduction first. So my name is Mellis Howard. I'm a director at Archio Architects, and we're involved in community-led housing in many different aspects. So for instance, we designed and delivered the first ever direct delivery community land trust housing in London, which is a project called Citizens House. We work a lot with brilliant housing associations and local authorities, and have been named in the top 50 social housing architects in the world. I always feel a little bit embarrassed reading these things out, but I do feel proud as well. The reason I want to talk about co-design is that this is a fundamental approach for us as architects, and we are working at a range of projects, including what's on the screen is some models we built for a retrofit strategy for the largest public housing scheme in Europe, which is the Becontree Estate in Barking and Dagenham, which has 27,000 homes, and we co-designed a retrofit strategy with residents, and we think that it's the only and best way to approach getting the best outcomes out of housing-led regeneration. And sometimes everything feels a bit housing focused, and maybe that feels a bit niche and a bit narrow, but it's sort of a thrill of my career to be working across so many types of housing, and just a few on the screen here. And today I'm going to be talking about co-housing, but in a way it's part of a huge series of kind of learning and ecosystem around housing, which also includes local authority estate regeneration, town extensions, etc. And on the bottom right, and maybe for another happy hour in the future, we're working with the accessible housing experts and housing association HAPPI on accessible homes on small sites in Barking and Dagenham, which has been really interesting. So I thought, since I was going up first, I would just set the scene on co-housing slightly. So co-housing is often described as building an intentional community. And here I've called it an intentional intergenerational community. There are lots of different types of co-housing, but the fundamental approach here is that you have your own home that services your life independently, but you can also choose to share other facilities in order to have a more intentionally shared communal living. And this photo is one from a scheme that I was lucky enough to visit in Holland when I was teaching undergrad at the at UCL. We taught for a whole year on the theme of co-housing, which was a real thrill. So Angel Yard is a project for Town, who are the co-housing developers who built Marmalade Lane, which is a very, very well-known project in Cambridge. And it's a 34 home co-housing scheme, which got planning permission last year at committee in Norwich and is currently going through the detailed design phases, and we're due on site next year, which is very exciting. The scheme is for 34 families of between the ages of 2 and 90, and a range of sizes of homes from 1 beds to 4 bed homes. And interestingly, also includes 2 homes for assisted living homes. There's a relationship they've formed with a local supported living housing association. The scheme is also designed with very, very high sustainability credentials, which I'll touch on later on, and is designed to passive house standards with a timber frame construction, etc. So we at Archio think that co-designing or sharing the design process with the lived experience of residents is really fundamental to achieving the best outcomes in design. And we do this, we use our co-design toolkit that we produced, whether it's a local authority scheme, a large build to rent scheme, or a co-housing scheme. And we produce this co-design toolkit to consolidate our experience of working directly with residents into a series of tools which we hope not just demystify the experience, but actually inspire clients to think about co-design not just as handing over power, but as actually gaining knowledge and ways, creative ways of having informed conversation with future clients and neighbours to a project. And I think what I wanted to talk about was this extraordinary opportunity at Angel Yard and challenge of co-designing a 34 home scheme with 34 homeowners. And that's not just 34 people, because sometimes there was 2 people, so it was at times up to 50 people simultaneously designing their homes. So I'm just going to take you through some steps that also give examples of the kinds of co-design tools we use, and I'll gradually unveil the design of Angel Yard as I go. So this was a very early site diagram for this wonderful site, which is kind of bridging between 2 really fascinating conservation areas and a low-rise industrial area in north over the water Norwich, just north of the city walls. And one of the first, this is sort of shortcutting quite a lot of conversations and brief setting, but one of the first big decisions we had to make as a group was where on this courtyard scheme would the common house be located. And we had various options. We described those with pros and cons. You can see the kind of 5 or 6 options on the screen. And this was all happening during COVID, so it was all online. And one of the key things we understand as designers and co-design experts in this process is we don't want to create a divisive situation where people are pitting each other, they're pitting their decisions against each other. These are future neighbours. We wanted to use this co-design process as an opportunity to actually make for a more cohesive community once they live together. So very conscious of not creating binary decision making, yes or no, are you in that camp or that camp? Do you think this? Do you think that? So for instance, you can see a screenshot of how we used a traffic light check for this decision, like your likes, your maybes and your dislikes for each position, so that we weren't asking people to state their position. I want this location or I want this, because we wanted people to make that decision cohesively and collectively. Ultimately, the decision was made to place the common house here on this wing. It takes advantage of site topography and other factors. I mean, it was really interesting working with the group because we had various assumptions of where the common house should be located, the shared facilities. But in talking to the group, they had such much closer lived experience of the neighbourhood and where their routes to shops and school, etc., were, that it really changed our assumptions. And that, for me, is a big point of co-design, is that we come as experts thinking, with an assumption, but that should be challenged by the people who also really know the place. Within the common house, some of the facilities are a shared kitchen and a laundry, 2 guest rooms, etc. And something that was really interesting came out of the conversation is the group have a big focus on reducing their environmental footprint. And we decided to include a large library of things within the kitchen, actually at this point here, if you can see my mouse, on the street corner, in a way saying, also as a signpost to the rest of the neighbourhood, like a bit like a shop front, a clue of what's going on behind the scenes. What is this co-housing community? They very much didn't want to be behind closed doors. They wanted a shop front that would show what they were about. I just found this screenshot of the way that we, using Miro board as an online whiteboard, record. We couldn't interview each of the 40 to 45 people that joined each call on each subject, but we made sure that they had the opportunity to feedback on each point, and we collated all of their feedback after the 1.5 hour, 2 hour meeting. And for us, everybody having a voice was very important, although we did also work with specific specialist groups within the co-housing group, so specialists on design, allocations, etc. Some people often ask what actually changed because of co-design. How did the actual building change, not just, the landscape or the bits in between the soft bits? Something that I found really inspiring that came out of this conversation and the ability to meet everybody in this group was that although everybody wanted to join an intentional co-housing community, some people wanted to stay quite private in their future lives, and some people wanted to be fully embracing the shared living. So you can see on screen that I've highlighted the 2 rows of apartments. The houses are on the east, and we flipped the walkway access from a street-facing walkway to become a shared wide walkway to this row of flats, because the people living on this row wanted to share more, be more part of the community. So having a very small, slim private balcony, just space for a little chair and a table, but most of their kind of communal living they wanted to be doing on these larger shared wide walkways. Whereas some of the residents who are living on this row, they wanted to be able to dip in to kind of shared activities. So they will be living on these homes here, which have their own private balcony facing the shared courtyard. We triangulated the balconies to create what was otherwise a very simple construction, a rectangular box, to create something with more depth and the ability to have a more interesting design, for want of a better word. Another thing about group decision making, I always found it really interesting. We had we're working with Frances Wright, who is an original resident of Marmalade Lane and is now a community runs all the kind of community engagement for town. And sustainability and how much the group were going to invest in sustainability became felt like a key topic. Again, not to make decisive. They felt like there were very broad range of attitudes towards what they as a group wanted to spend on sustainability, i.e., were they willing to invest in passive house? Were they willing as a group to invest in a microgrid, etc.? So rather than, again, asking people to vote in a binary fashion, we asked people to position themselves along a long line of sort of warm to cold, how they felt broadly about this. And through discussion, they kind of changed their position on that line in this in-person workshop, which was really interesting. Ultimately, the scheme is aiming to hit very, very high sustainability credentials with fully passive house accredited, cross-laminated timber construction. All the homes have dual or triple aspect. And there'll be an on-site battery and microgrid. I could go on about that more. I'm wrapping up now. I've just got a couple more slides. So that's Angel Yard. That was the process and that project, which excitingly is heading for site next year. We're also working with town on other projects where you may think, okay, that's fair enough. It's easy to engage with a group of residents who are definitely going to live there in the future. But what about those how would you, for instance, engage with renters? They're so transitory, you wouldn't be able to necessarily meet them and know that they'd move in 2-3 years' time. So on a project with town at the moment and the Crown Estate, we're working with a panel of potential future renters who have paid for their time to feed into their thoughts on prioritizing their relationship to landscape, shared living, etc. So I suppose my point here is, even if you don't have a kind of captured audience, as you do with co-housing, it's still very possible, if you're creative and you're ambitious, to have those kinds of conversations. And I enjoyed the parallel pictures on screen here. On the right, we have a model making exercise we held with future residents, and on the left, a AI generated mid-journey thought experiment. And we always think it's really fun to try to be switching between different modes of co-design. and you get different results from each, which are all both really powerful. And just as a final note, I think co-designing also with communities who will never live there, but with communities who are on the edge of a project, can also be done if you're ambitious and you're and you start with genuine conversations. And we're really proud of this project, Citizens House, which just won a national RIBA award, and at the time, after an extensive co-design process, received an unprecedented 107 letters of support at planning, which was frustratingly also so many that the council thought something untoward was going on, so reconsulted on the whole planning application, which I had never expected. But in any case, that case study and others are all included in our co-design toolkit. And if you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to email that to anybody who's interested. So that's me, that's done.
Wow, that was fabulous, as they would say on Strictly Come Dancing. No, that was that. I've got 10 panels for all of you, panels for all of you, but in advance. But thanks, that was really good. And you mentioned the work of Frances and others at Town. In fact, I think Sally's posted a blog that she wrote about her experience about Marmalade Lane. And I was struck by some of the things around about deck access and balconies, not just thinking about the sort of the meeting space, but also I recall during the pandemic how important it was for people to have that space, both for sort of natural ventilation, but also circulation space. So there's a whole other subject that you've unlocked in my head. But coming back to the principles of co-design, I think thanks very much. That's very much at the heart of what we want to see through their LIN. So brilliant, really great opening. So Sam, follow
Hello.
that, because I know that co-production, co-design in a different setting has also been very fundamental to how you think about how community should play an active role in shaping those future housing, and not just around older adults, but of all ages as well, which I think is another point that Mellis drew on. So over to you, Sam.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, everybody. Good afternoon, and it's nice to see people, or not, as the case is on Zoom. But I'm Sam Goss from Barefoot Architects. And similarly, absolutely delighted to be here at the Happy Hour to share the story of Hazelmead, which I think is a sort of remarkable co-housing neighbourhood delivered by Bridport Community Land Trust over in West Dorset. And it's a project that I've been involved with, and we've been involved as a practice for over 10 years. And I think it's been very lucky to get some accolades and awards this year. And I think that's a demonstration of how it's just resonating really widely with people. So I'm going to start off by sharing a video, which is just a couple of minutes long. And we've got the full version of this on our website, and I'll put a link in, but hopefully this is okay.
I was living in a private rented accommodation, old, damp, too big for me really, cold. And I realised that as I was getting older, I needed a different living situation. I needed something affordable, but also a sense of support and care amongst people, and amongst people of all ages. Connection, I suppose.
Because it's a co-housing project, the residents and the brief was focused upon designing in sociability. How could we encourage, facilitate, enable more social interaction through the homes and the landscape spaces themselves? And so we ran a series of co-design workshops to create and design homes and a neighborhood intentionally supporting human interaction.
To have no traffic, being able to walk and talk and have the children playing is just a fantastic thing.
In the warmer weather, lots of people are sitting on their benches, which is an architectural gift that we've got. We have a space that we all own and we're all responsible for, and we use in various ways. Having made friends with some of the people here, that's just lovely, because they're my neighbours too. And that's a wonderful way to live.
I guess it's probably if you live somewhere where your extended family were nearby, it's a little bit like that. So when you need something, you can call on help.
I joined for HAPPI because, people should have communities around them, whatever their needs are, whatever their abilities are. But I never expected to get so much out of it. I absolutely love that I live so close to people that I really care about. And I know they really care about me. And that's that's pretty amazing, really.
Okay. The residents telling their stories say it so much more powerfully than I think I ever can, really. And so I'm now going to try and unpack a bit of the journey of how the residents and this community came into being. So we've always referred to the project as a place to grow. Really, it's a space that's grown the town, the community, and the individual lives that live there. And, you know, I've begun to sort of think about this phrase as to whether or not this might represent, we could call it citizen-led architecture, but I'm thinking of it as vigilante architecture at the moment, because the housing system was, and still is broken. And so a group of ordinary people, mostly retired, decided to come together and do something really extraordinary. And this group of local residents have created a £10 million net zero carbon in operation, car-free co-housing community comprising of 53 100% affordable homes. But it's taken more than 15 years and it really hasn't been easy. But nonetheless, they have done it. So I sort of celebrate their story. And, you know, the line they gave to us was always that they wanted it to be more sustainable, more affordable, more neighbourly. And as I've sort of been saying recently, I think it's also just much more ambitious as a project. So they started out having to buy a parcel of land on the edge of their town in West Dorset's now National Landscape, formerly Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, where they were seeking to create 100% affordable housing. And the land was sold to them by a local landowner who really wanted to leave a legacy for her town. Her family had owned a series of fields on the farm formerly operated, and they've successively sold them off. So this was actually just nothing more than a grazing paddock when I first visited it. The group, as advised by their then MP, Sir Oliver Letwin, really wisely advised them to form a community land trust on the basis that that would be a really good organisational structure to enable them to seek grant funding. And this would enable them to ultimately build what is 50% socially rented homes and 50% shared ownership, where people can staircase up to a maximum of 80%. Now, through really complex negotiations with the NHS Trust, who own and run the hospital immediately next door, they negotiated access onto the site. And one of the repercussions of that was that the site then also designated 6 homes for nurses who couldn't afford to live in the town prior to this project. So it's been, you know, doing a really good permanent housing solution for the hospital that it adjoins. You know, similarly to what Mellis has just described so beautifully and illustrated with some amazing different processes, you know, in 2014, I quit my job the day I was offered this project and founded the practice and started working on it full time. And over a course of about 6 months to reach the first planning application, we co-designed the project with a group of residents using a series of structured workshops that comprised of myself, the landscape architect, the 2 professional advisors that brought us on board, all working closely together in the room and working from, you know, macro to micro scales. We sought to treat the experts, the residents, as sort of experts of their own lives and landscapes. And they really brought out a range of issues, ideas that challenged and changed the design quite fundamentally as part of the process. And I think as a group of principally retired or older prospective residents, the thing I felt they did so successfully was bring real kind of wisdom and foresight around how to design flexible homes that would also work for families as well as for themselves, given that they really specifically wanted this to be an intergenerational neighbourhood. So some of the kind of key principles of the master plan and site layout are that fundamentally cars should stay at the edge of the site. And that means that the streets are flat and car free by being really accessible and following the contours of what is actually quite a sloping site. The common house, which contains a large dining room, a shared kitchen and storage spaces, sits sort of in the middle of the site and acts as a vessel through which people arrive and depart in the site, and also being much closer to the two blocks of one-bedroom flats on either side of it, which principally hold some of the older residents. All of the houses on the site face south, and the kitchens and actually dining spaces on this project face the front. And that's a sort of simple thing that encourages social interaction with the street. And then really fundamentally, one of the reasons it's a place to grow is food production, and growing was an integral part of the growth of this community. So throughout the design phase and indeed the construction, the residents shared a garden space and an allotment, which was where they came together to get to know one another and really build their community throughout the building of the project. So part of their ambition initially was to try and achieve passive house, but back in 2019, that wasn't really quite affordable. And so through the design and build procurement process, it was decided to follow the AECB, Association of Environmentally Conscious Builders, carbon light standard, which follows a sort of similar degree of testing and rigor to passive house, but slightly lower performance metrics, which are all on the right of that slide and we can share. Now, I think what's sort of super interesting about it is it has made them all electric, super insulated homes, and they actually outperform the design standard by quite a significant margin, which, you know, you can't always say. And I think it was the benefit of the resident engagement, the co-design and community-led process that pushed this agenda for higher standards of sustainability and acoustic separation. What that means is that, you know, ultimately this has created a much more healthy set of homes. And part of the sort of healthy homes approach that we adopted at the time was to incorporate as many as the different Lifetimes home standards as we meaningfully could within the constraints of the size and budget of the homes. And that included some really sort of simple things like having much lower window sills within the living spaces, so that if you're an elderly person and spend more time sitting down in your day, you can see out of a window and connect much more easily with nature and the community. And the aim of all these things was to allow people to age in place. Part of the project developed a community-owned microgrid, and that's run by a subsidiary of the Community Land Trust, and it distributes power from the shared solar array on the south-facing roofscape. And this provides reduced cost electricity at a minimum of 25% reduction from mains service providers. And this, again, is sort of significant in cutting fuel poverty and addressing another component of the unaffordability of housing. Now, it powers the all-electric homes, and the total generated electricity equals almost exactly all of the electricity consumed for small power, lighting, heating, and hot water. And it's fair to say I've had some feedback from residents saying that some of the heat pumps that are only doing hot water are causing problems. So it's not all perfect. So, you know, life at Hazelmead, it really does feel relaxed and informal when you're there. And removing the cars from the centre of the development is utterly transformational. It really does create a safe, calm, and kind of playful atmosphere. And it's something which everybody notices instantly when they arrive. The village green in the centre of the development really connects the flats, the lower housing terrace, and the common house. And it's becoming a kind of social heart of the neighbourhood. And it's a place for gatherings, celebrations, and everyday occasions. And, you know, you almost can't write it. The one time I was there was a communal working party in the garden, and people were bringing out tea and cake and sharing it round a table. And it just is lovely how the provision of these additional spaces actually enables social cohesion. Now, Judith beautifully described the benches and solar shading at the front of her house as an architectural gift, and I love that term. It's something which is multifunctional and multi-purpose, providing solar shading, but also a place for people to sit out in the front of their houses, overlooking these car-free streets. And again, every time I go there, people are reading their books, sitting, chatting with friends, having a glass of wine, and you know, it creates the opportunities for interaction when people want it. Judith here, featured in the film, one of her kind of key inputs into the co-design process was to say, well, look, you know, most commonly in co-housing, people say put the kitchens at the front of the houses. And she said, actually, why don't we have the dining tables at the front of the houses? Because that's where people sit for longest. That's where they'll be able to dwell and actually engage with people in the street. And it really does afford that sense of connection. And there's a list of other kind of benefits of the fronts of the houses. I think picking up on something Mellis said, I think there's a real balance between co-housing which needs to be explained. And I sort of started describing it as though people can have their cake and eat it. It is both about having the social life and opportunity of additional facilities of a common house and guest bedrooms and a laundry. But you don't sacrifice your ability for privacy, which is also possible and afforded. And I think, you know, we've done that with just the simple living arrangement being at the back of the homes. As I said, growing together is such an important part of this community. We've really found it seems to be something which is binding together the adults and younger children, working side by side. It's a sort of equalizer and seems to be giving a lot of people a real sense of purpose, joy and routine. And this image on the left, I think, really beautifully displays that, because B is not the parent of these children, but she's teaching them how to grow fresh food that they then share through little stakes in the ground saying this is ready to pick, or they gather it and put it in the post room for collection. Sharing food, again, is another thing that's really helping to bring people together. And the common house has been self-built, really sort of painstakingly, lovingly, slowly as a labour of love. But in the meantime, each of the terraces are actually having shared meals around each other's homes. And that kind of ability to create intergenerational relationships is really something special. I think it's impossible to overestimate how transformative the development here is for children and young people, and the ability, simple ability to play in the streets. And I've heard some of the parents say things like it's given children their childhood back because they're able to play safely for the first time in their lives. And they know every single adult on site by name. And a lovely story was that there was a 15-year-old had a birthday party at the end of the summer, and she invited 2 or 3 of the 70-year-old women to come along with her friends because they now know each other so well. So this is sort of my provocation, really. And what's fascinating to me is that Hazelmead has really resonated widely across the people that have visited it. And I think that's because it's a real project of social justice in an era of what is such deep inequality in the UK. And I think fundamentally it's a powerful example showing what's possible when people come together and take action. But the question I've got is, why should they have to fight for 15 years to create the homes and neighbourhoods that people need? And why isn't this form of collaborative, sustainable, people-centred development simply the norm? Thank you.
Dan, well, I've put my 10 paddle up as well for you, but what I really liked about what you were talking about there was, I think you had a phrase about gifting time. And I think what you highlighted there was the reciprocity and the mutuality that something like Hazelmead has engendered, which actually will be a lasting gift to that community and for people who come and live there in years to come. I think that's a real important thing, and something that I'm really struck by. And I'm sure it's something also that Dawn will highlight in her presentation, because I think you left us with the calling card about, you know, this, why doesn't every community have this? And we're going to hear a little bit more about an inner city community, a completely different makeup, and something that is really special, I think, that Housing 21 are doing and Birmingham. Dawn, I can see Harry's also on the delegate list. So Harry, the warm welcome from the LIN as well to you. But Dawn's got the piece for now. So over to you, Dawn. We look forward to your dance.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me and such a warm welcome. As you mentioned, I'm Dawn Carr, and I'm the Co-Housing Partnership Manager here at Housing 21, and I'm delighted to be here to share a story not just about housing, but about people, place, and possibility. Next slide, please. So, for those who are unfamiliar with Housing 21, we're a housing association that provides retirement living and extra care homes for older people. We've been in operation for over 60 years and manage approximately around 22,000 properties across England. I myself am based in the Birmingham area, in case you don't realise, and our HQ is in Birmingham also. But today, what I want to do is talk about something new that we're investing in, which is obviously co-housing, as we're talking about today. But more or less, what I want to talk about is why it matters. And today I'm only going to give you a snapshot of the project, but the wider details can be found in a resource for housing providers, which was developed by UK Housing Network, which is featured on this slide. It's called How to Create Inclusive, Affordable, Collaborative Neighbourhoods for Older People. And I did contribute to a paragraph in that resource. So my journey towards co-housing didn't actually start with a policy paper. It started in a community room, sitting with a group of Bengali women who were mothers, grandmothers, carers, but all of them had been overlooked by traditional housing systems. I asked them one question: what does aging in place mean to them? And they spoke about wanting to stay close to their communities, their friends, their mosques or faith groups, and their local markets. Most of them were living in extended family homes, and they were grateful for that support and loved being with their grandparents, with their grandchildren and their family. However, they also shared with us the challenges of informal multi-generational living, such as lack of space, storage, privacy, and also the strain it can have on family life. We also need to recognise that while most people enjoy the benefits of ageing and longer living and living better, ageing well for some communities, especially minority communities, can be a struggle. Most are facing financial hardship, ill health, and reduced life expectancy. Some of them that we spoke to were dealing with the day-to-day challenges which are related to urban areas, such as damp and mold, dangerous wiring, and other hazards. What we did was continue the conversation with these residents, and we talked about other options for later life. Many of them had never heard of retirement housing and were unaware of the mainstream options for later life. Those that had often associated it with isolation and abandonment. And what they wanted was a standard, decent home that was designed in a way that respected their culture, their independence, but also kept them connected. Now, I think Mellis and Sam have gone through the benefits of co-housing in a wonderful way, so I don't need to go on about that. But what I will talk about is some of the challenges for Black and minority ethnic communities. So we've got a UK next slide, please, sorry. So next slide. We have a UK population that is not only growing, but aging. At the moment, there's about 11 million people who are aged 65 and plus, and that's predicted to increase to 13 million in 5 years' time. You can see a quote here that's from the APPG report, which is called Are You Ready?, which talks about the old assumptions of BAME communities and especially about parents and grandparents being kept at home and the strain of extended families. So the changes in lifestyles and the expectations of the aging population will continue to influence the ethnic housing model. So for providers like ourselves who are providing for older people, we're facing competing priorities. The first one is outdated housing stock that needs to be updated and making it sustainable, but also appealing to the future generation. The second one is responding to that growth and in housing crisis and preparing for aging, but also the increasing diverse population in urban cities. Housing 21 has an open, inclusive policy towards recruiting residents. However, the bulk of our stock doesn't meet the needs of BAME communities. So how do we plan ahead? And that's where co-production and community-led housing comes into play. Next slide, please, sorry. So we are reimagining co-housing here at Housing 21. And for us, it's not just a place for like-minded people, it's for us to build a community built on mutual respect and support. We see it as a place where neighbours can look out for each other, where cultural needs are met, and where people can age with dignity, surrounded by the familiar. Our programme aims to address the needs of ethnically diverse communities with a focus on providing housing for older people in areas of deprivation. And what we find is, just as you saw from all the examples, when we co-design with residents, we find that something powerful happens. People find a voice, they find agency and build a community. But for us, the key elements of Housing 21 starts with that intentional community. And we work with the intentional community who will be living in the actual site by co-developing, co-designing and encouraging them to do community-led engagement. For us in particular, we want to add value to urban areas. So we want to make sure that whatever we design is connected to the wider community and accessible to the wider community as well. But essentially, just like all the other examples you've seen, it's designed to facilitate community interactions. Next slide. So those community interactions can take any shape. And some of these are just some of the examples of the model. And like I said, I'm saying what everybody else said already, making sure that car parking is at the edge of the site, being able to walk around the site. For us, the common house was the most important purpose of the design. Leading to giving people that opportunity to meet, to share, to talk, but also what makes this different from other co-housing sites and our other stock at Housing 21 is the fact that it has a multi-faith room and facilities for ritual ablution for faith, and that's something we would not normally have in one of our sites. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about our pilot project, which is going to be opened in 2026. It's based in a very deprived area called Lozells, Birmingham, and it's called Rupali Court. So we purchased a derelict piece of land from Birmingham City Council in 2023 to develop 25 1- and 2-bedroomed apartments for over 55s, which are available for social rent. We enlisted the support of a local facilitation partner, which is called Legacy West Midlands, which is where I worked before, to help us access those seldom engaged communities. And also it helped to build trust. This was an important element of this process. I haven't gone into all the processes because I knew Sam and Mellis would go into how we consult and engage with communities. But I think as a result of those conversations, we set up a local group, a local project group, which involved other stakeholders from the local authority, as well as Triangle Architects, who are on this meeting as well, and other stakeholders in this project. And as well as the local project group, of course, we capacity builded the interested intentional community into what we now call Rupali Court Committee. And they meet on a regular basis to discuss all aspects of this project, not just the design, but the consensus decision making and how they will run the scheme when they move in. Next slide, please. So in terms of co-production on design, this differs from most of our stock because there were many different stages where the community had a say in the design and how it would be delivered. I've spoke about a lot of things, but what I haven't spoke about is the name of the site, which is Rupali Court. This was the first time residents had that opportunity to name the site, and they chose the word Rupali because it meant silver in Bengali. And silver is something that's often related to aging communities, like silver citizen and silver surfer and all sorts of different things. So they felt that that was appropriate. But also, where the site is located, which was called Chain Walk, was also the homes of local silversmiths of our local attraction, which is called Jewelry Quarter in the Birmingham area. So it's bringing together the two cultures, the actual heritage of the area plus the culture of the community, which I think is great. As you can see in the photograph, they were involved in the design of the interior common spaces, their individual kitchens, bathrooms and front doors. And also what we did was something we've never looked at Housing 21, which is inclusive signage across the site. Next slide, please. So I've just got a quote from a future resident of Rupali Court, and he's part of the committee. I'm not going to go through it all, but what I felt I'd like to bring attention to is he said he actually felt comfortable to join the group and he was willing to get involved. He says that Rupali Court will not just be a retirement home. He said these are 25 people and we are a family. He says we should look after each other because we are all more or less, and we are all old people. So this will be a fantastic opportunity for everybody to become a family. And I thought that was a really nice comment that he made there. The residents of Rupali Court come from all different backgrounds. Some of them are from Islamic backgrounds. There are Caribbeans, and there's also three white residents as well. And for them to think of themselves as a family in a really urban area like Lozells, which is full of complications, I think that to me is the ultimate outcome. Next slide, please. There's some other comments from residents, and if you do sign up to receive the slides, I think I'll go through those. You can go through those at leisure. There are many different comments there. Next slide, please. So what were the lessons learned? I think for us, we learned that traditional nomination processes in housing often excludes those who are most in need. And there is internal gatekeeping within those housing structures that exacerbate the problem, and lack of representation must be addressed to ensure inclusivity. I think for us, finding a suitable site we found was a real challenge, and the challenges of de-risking brownfield land can have an effect on the actual timescales of the project. So we found that co-housing, it does take a long time to develop, and keeping those residents engaged, keeping the committee, engaged in it, was really a challenge for us. But at the end of the day, we feel that there is a housing need that needs to be met. 25 units is not going to make much of a difference, but at least we're making steps to address those housing needs as well. Next slide, please. So I want to thank you for listening to our presentation today. There is a code there if you want to scan it to find more information about the project and and further updates also. So thank you very much.
Dawn, another fantastic presentation, and none of you are going to be in the dance off, I can tell you that for sure. Apologies to everybody for these strictly references. But what I really liked about what you're saying there is about how, as an organisation, you're so engaged with your community about giving them a voice. And I think what runs through that giving a voice is, whether it's the citizen-led approach that Mellis talked about, or the gifting time and citizen power that Sam touched on. There's a real silver thread here about that. So perhaps a Rupali thread, indeed. So no, fantastic. Now we've got about 8 or so minutes for questions and answers, and I know some people have already sort of had a chance to look at those Q&A and answer those, but I'm going to just take the opportunity to go through those for those people who haven't had a chance to read those. So I think the first was from Emma, and I think Mellis, you started answering this about consulting with initial first residents. And while this sort of had a reference to Marmalade Lane, it's about how do you get that right balance of representing the opinions of all future residents, especially after the first cohort of move. Can you just sort of paraphrase what you responded?
Yes, well, first of all, I can't take any credit for Marmalade Lane. We worked on Angel Yard. That was the wonderful mole. I think we were very conscious in co-designing these 34 homes also that they had to, those people who wanted 2-bed homes had to also work together to create repeated house layouts so that we didn't have 34 individual bespoke homes. And in doing that, we had to consider the needs and wants of future residents. So we were very focused on creating kind of very flexible, generous homes that would work for a number of different uses. So for instance, there are some residents who live in 2-bed homes, but they're only a couple. They'll be using the second bedroom for guests or a workroom, and others that are using it in other ways. And they had to be mindful of each other's needs in designing the same home, which was really interesting. And as a kind of housing nerd, it was a dream commission, frankly. In terms of like beyond just the homes themselves, we were thinking about the future of the landscape particularly. So Norwich Council supported the scheme very well, but they were very specific about housing, car parking numbers. But knowing that in a co-housing community, it's easy to reduce those car parking numbers through shared car schemes, and just generally as a community, they want to use cars less than maybe a typical housing development. We designed it so much that one row of car parking could be subsumed into the courtyard garden as time went on, which I know happened at Marmalade Lane. So yeah, we're thinking about making flexible homes that would suit future residents, but also thinking about the future of how adaptable the whole kind of landscape and place could be in the future.
Thank you. So I'm going to jump to another question, which was posted by, actually wasn't Katie, it was by Jim Hudson, who's a long-term friend of the LIN. And for those of you who don't know, has written a great, or co-authored a great book called Chic, Community Collaborative Housing and Innovative Care Models. And he asked, following on from Emma's question, how does the co-housing group decide on the proportion of homes aimed at older people, say X number of flats, and those with more significant care needs? Dawn, can I come to you first before asking Sam?
Yes, sorry. Just repeat the question again.
Yeah, following on from Emma's question, how does the co-housing group decide on the proportion of homes aimed at older people and say a number of flats for people with more significant care needs?
I think for us, it's still very much a pilot. And I think when Mellis was talking about having 35 voices, and 35 opinions, we started quite small because we felt that whilst we're learning about co-housing and developing the model, we're focusing on the actual consensus decision making and how we can manage that. So for our sites are roughly around 18 to 40, units. So we feel that that's a manageable number for us. And also, as I said, our focus is on real urban areas really aging in place in some of the the most deprived areas across the UK, where land is scarce, and as I said, it's usually brownfield land that we have to work with because it's cheap, it's accessible, and that's all there is locally. So these will be very, very small sites. When we spoke to in particular, the Bengali community that I mentioned and other communities, whilst we have stock that are out in the countryside that could be 300 plus, they felt that they wanted to stay in their local community and didn't want to be displaced out into the wider countryside.
Yeah, thanks for that. And Sam, I think your video clip showed the breadth of care and support needs that potentially co-housing accommodates. We had examples of people with complex needs as well as people wanting to future-proof themselves for future care and support. Any other thoughts about that?
I mean, they definitely intentionally set a proportion. I can't remember what the percentage is, but for households that needed to be under an average age of 65. But they did establish that because they definitely set out to intentionally be intergenerational. I mean, I could share Lynn's story. Lynn in another video talks about how she observed her parents entering into their 70s, see their lives become more and more constrained, and as they moved into a care home, their opportunities shut down. And she said she's having the absolute inverse experience living in co-housing, that her world is opening out really widely to a much broader set of generations. And I think she doesn't have children, and I think the pleasure she gets from seeing younger people on site is really significant. And they definitely are offering each other sort of soft care. They talk about caring about each other, not for each other.
Yeah, no, I like that. There's another question from Emma, really about the tenure mix, and I think Sam, you've responded about the sort of the balance around social rent and shared ownership. Mellis, you talked about Marmalade Lane. I think that's outright ownership or leasehold model from memory. Dawn, again, yours are presumably is an affordable home basis for Rupali Court.
Yeah, I mean, currently, as I said, it's still a pilot, so we've opted to just go for affordable rent at this stage. We in the conversations we've had with communities, they've discussed two things. Obviously, mixing in the intergenerational living like the other sites, which we want to make sure the model is correct first before we start bringing that into the mix. And then we haven't opted to go for shared ownership at this stage.
No, but I think I know that Housing 21 offer a shared ownership package across other developments as well. So again, it's extending a broad range of choice that you touched on. Look, I'm going to end up with one final question. I don't think it's been answered in the Q&A box, and this is from Savannah, and she raises a really interesting point about thinking about how accommodation such as co-housing and typologies can be applied for other sort of groups, and she touches on, I think, temporary accommodation and homelessness. So again, any thoughts about that, thinking outside an intergenerational community or older persons home housing, thinking about other sort of perhaps short stay or short life type of accommodation? Any thoughts?
I have a thought on it. It's not specifically to do with temporary accommodation, but I think our approach to general needs housing for local authorities and housing associations in a way takes very much a shared living approach, and in a way we try and push that agenda as far as we can, where we are able to think about the kind of benefits of co-housing, common house or shared garden. We try and use those, what we think are sort of fundamentals to the future of living. I mean, I think that we should all be living more communally, and co-housing is pointing in that direction. And so we try and encourage that in the kind of places and spaces we create, where the brief is really just for general needs housing, and often is for very efficiently delivered affordable housing. And our Citizens House project, which was purely 100% affordable discount market sale homes, is all about we co-designed a very sociable place that has a shared landscape that we co-designed with residents from around the neighbouring estates, schools, etc. And because in a way that the ethos of the shared garden and all the attributes of co-housing kind of infiltrates all of our work. And I think that's maybe how we all should be thinking. I think it's interesting to think about it in terms of temporary accommodation, etc., because it's more and more on people's minds as the kind of bills for temporary accommodation kind of undermines everything that local authorities are trying to do in terms of housing waiting lists.
Sam, any thoughts?
Well, I think it's interesting. I mean, I think simply, and I'm sure it's being done by Savannah, but maybe it's about bringing people together in a room and having those conversations, and looking, even working with an architect or somebody who could produce some high-level drawings of the accommodation that's being proposed, and to just talk about some of the issues that might be presented by existing layouts, if it's if you're working with existing buildings, or if there is an opportunity to be designing something afresh, having those really early engagements with more people and using some of the tools and workshops that Mellis and I have discussed. I could see that being, a really interactive and helpful learning session to get, broad feedback on what the issues are.
And Dawn, you referred to the UK Co-Housing Network as well. So again, there are also agencies as well that support the co-production and co-design along with the LIN. So any other final thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we felt it's important to be part of the network and learn from other models and other agencies. For us, we're not a general needs. We are, a housing association for older persons. So that does limit the way we operate. However, it is genuinely a community-led process. And in some of the conversations we had with communities, they did discuss the idea of having a spare, unit or apartment for people who may be coming out of hospital and needed support and care, or or any other situation that may arise that's temporary. But that again, it has to be covered by that community. As an organisation, we can't afford to have an empty void, so it would mean an increase in their rent to cover that enterprise or that opportunity. But we have explored different models, and in addition, we are looking at supporting other communities that are protected characteristics. So we're focused on Black and minority ethnic communities at the moment, but we will be looking at supporting LGBT communities and other protected characteristics as the model evolves.
Well, it's great. It's great to hear, and we look forward to sort of following up with you on that as well, because I think all of you have brought such a diverse approach to thinking about this that we probably, an hour is not long enough, and I think we've generated another 3 or 4 questions even while the Q&A sessions has been going on. But look, can I, on behalf of the Housing LIN, thank all 3 of you for fantastic presentations. Apologies, we've not had a chance to go through all the questions for those people who've posted ones more recently. If this is the first time that you've joined the Housing LIN Happy Hour, we tend to hold these every Tuesday afternoon. In fact, next week we're having a look at what's happening in Scotland with 3 fabulous presentations from north of the border. So please do join us on again next week. If this is also something, an area about co-housing that you're not familiar with, and particularly through the lens of an ageing population, the LIN curates a dedicated web page on that on our Housing LIN website. But can I again thank everybody who's joined us. The applause I can see are for filtering up the screen and in the chat box. And can I also thank Sally and the team behind the scenes for hosting today's Happy Hour. And we look forward to coming back to all 3 of you in the future, perhaps in 26, to explore further some of the ideas that you've presented today. And can I just wish you a happy evening. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you so much. Great to see you all. Bye-bye.